Good evening. My name is Nina Coleman. I'm the Director of Natural Resources here in the town of Barnstable. And with me tonight is Chris Nappy, who is our Fisheries and Wildlife Specialist for the town of Barnstable, and Amy Croto, who is our Shellfish Constable. And we're going to talk about our natural resource program. It's a little different than what's in your chapter, and I want to just take a minute to talk about what our programs are and what we do before we kind of dive into the resources that we love and protect, and also maybe some suggestions about what we'd like to see in the next 10 years. So, natural resources, there's two arms of the Marine Environmental Affairs Department. One arm is Harbor Master, and the other arm is Natural Resources. So we are a division. Within our division, we have 4 programs: Shellfish, Natural Resources, Sandy Neck, which is an enterprise account, and Animal Control. So what are we responsible for? So the topics that we own, if there's an issue, the town comes to us, is all things shellfish, all things Sandy Neck. We are foremost enforcement officers for environmental laws and regulations. We are in charge of and manage the herring runs in town. We deal with the hunting and freshwater fishing in our town. We deal with all domestic animal control issues, wildlife issues, and we are completely involved with the endangered species protection in this town, which we're going to get into. Things that we dabble in, overlap in, are many of the topics that have already been discussed this evening. Water quality issues obviously affect many of our topics, and we're drawn in as experts to talk about that when issues come up. Open space management, this is definitely something that is confused with a lot of residents. Our conservation areas and our open space are managed by the Conservation Commission and other departments. Our role in these open space areas is enforcement. So we're the ones out there patrolling for ATV use, illegal trails, obviously hunting and other activities that occur in our open space. Lakes and ponds management, obviously we have a role there. Wetlands regulation, stormwater management, particularly when it's involved in areas near shellfish beds, and groundwater protection. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Chris Nappy.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Chris Nappy. I'm a Senior Natural Resource Officer here for the town. And so I'd just like to give the group here just a little bit about my perspective about what I see in my short time here working for the town. So I've been an employee and a natural resource officer for 12 years. And in that time, I get the opportunity to be out in all of these natural areas in town and see what's happening on a day-to-day basis, right? And so obviously the town is a destination because of its diverse natural resources. And there's just in these 2 pictures that I have in these slides, it's 2 very different estuaries, right? We have such a variety. It's the north side, Barnstable Harbor, with 12-foot tides. And then we have the south side, that's East Bay there, with 3-foot tides. So obviously, with those drastic differences, there comes a different way to manage it and, different things that can occur in those places. So, and then we have all of the people that come here to enjoy all those different opportunities that come along with that. And so what have I seen in my time here? Degrading water quality, which Mr. Gottlieb, he probably provided you with a lot more information that I'll give much more eloquently than I will as well. Take a good listen to the points that he had to say, because I'll probably have a very similar viewpoint on many of those points, particularly when it comes to water quality and critical habitat protection. I've also seen an increase in harmful algal blooms. That's in both fresh and salt water. We have, as he said, cyanobacteria blooms, and then algal blooms that are impacting our shellfish habitats. We're seeing loss of fishing and swimming opportunities due to these harmful algal blooms, which impacts a lot of recreation, and we're seeing loss of habitat both in coastal areas and in upland areas. And I think we need to take a real important look at upland habitat protection. The coastal areas and areas around wetlands do have a layer of protection, but there are also critical upland habitats that maybe people don't look at as critical, but in my experience being out there on a day-to-day basis and seeing them, they're actually not under municipal protection even though the town owns them, so they can be developed, and I think we need to take a look at those spots and actually provide them with an equal level of protection. And so, next, yeah, back one more. Yeah, it's okay. And so we're also seeing, because of this development, we're seeing an increase in the impacts of coastal storms. Just within the past month, we had 9 inches of rain in January. And along with that, we had, a lot of shoreline erosion, and then 9 inches of rain, definitely some of that is making it into our waterways, right? So doing a better job of treating that water. And I can say that there are projects that are aimed at doing that, but we need to do better. Okay, thank you. So what can we do? Yeah, comprehensive evaluation of undeveloped municipal and private properties, both upland, freshwater wetlands, and coastal wetlands. And we can determine their importance based on that, and then do thoughtful projects in those areas where development is needed to provide benefit for all residents, both human and non-human, right? The town should be, and that's what I say, and those thoughtful projects we're actually starting to. And so a big part of my job is herring run restoration projects, and then just kind of the general maintenance and operation of those herring runs. And so we have 5 herring runs in town, which I'll show on my next slide. And we do have a number of projects in all of those, which is good. Some of them are almost ready to be implemented, and some of them are still in the planning stage. But it's a step in the right direction. And then we also need to do, as I said, wetland and upland preservation. We need to take a look at these areas and provide them an extra level of protection. And then also bog restoration. Cranberry bogs restoration of cranberry bogs that are underutilized or not utilized can be important areas that could help with stormwater retention and also the effects of climate change. So I think moving forward, it's a good idea to provide natural resources with a spot at the table when decisions are made in terms of land acquisition. Because we have the specific knowledge of these critical areas, we have important input to provide. And so I know that there was a comprehensive plan that I was just really kind of made aware of from 2010, which was kind of shocking to me that I didn't even, I had a faint idea of what it was, but I just, it wasn't really referenced in our day-to-day stuff, which was kind of eye-opening that I was asked to, provide some information to this panel. So I think, and in that plan, there were wildlife corridors and watershed corridors that were mapped out in that plan. And I think that some of the language that's in that previous plan is important, and it's still relevant today, and a lot of those things just need to be implemented. So it's a good reference point for you all, that the implementation of some of these previous points are a good thing to moving forward. So here's just a brief slide that gives you a map of just the herring runs that we have in town. So we have 5 active herring runs. And I just wanted to give a little bit of education if the panel wasn't aware. And so they span across the villages. And like I said, we have a number of projects associated with these herring runs. And they're aimed at, providing the herring improved access to their spawning areas. And because we have such a variety of them, there's really a strong potential for them to, really flourish here. And herring is just one, and I bring them up because they're just one species that would lend to the increase in biodiversity that we could be reaching for. And that's an important part of the health of the environment in this town. And so what are we doing? We also have some projects that get the community involved in osprey nest pole installations. Maybe some of you have seen them out and around town. And they're new poles that get popped up, and we put them in town property. And we put them in particular areas where we know that there's conflicts with man-made infrastructure, and it helps mitigate those impacts. It's a really easy thing for us to do, and it's a good project for the town. And like I said, they promote biodiversity, which contributes to ecosystem resilience, enabling natural systems to adapt and recover from the environmental pressures and disturbances. And so the other project on the right, that's Mill Pond in West Barnstable. We're involved with the Division of Marine Fisheries with stocking herring in that pond. It was a historic herring run, which was actually not a herring run for a number of years because the population died. So we talked with the Division of Marine Fisheries and with a number of locals from West Barnstable, got together and convinced them to start this stocking project. And we're in year 3 of that project, and we're hopeful that it will be successful. So thank you. That's my part.
Hi, can everyone hear me all right? Okay. My name is Amy Croto. I am a senior natural resource officer and shellfish constable here in town. I started my employment with the town back in April of 2006, so I'm starting my 18th season. But I also was born down the street at Cape Cod Hospital circa 1980, so I not only have a view of the changes in our local environment throughout my tenure with the town, in my capacity, my position, but I also have the benefit of having grown up and recreated and played in a lot of the areas that I now strive to preserve and to protect. My specialty is shellfish, and there are a number of ways in which shellfish play a part in our local community. Through our municipal program is shellfish propagation. In the state of Massachusetts, any coastal community is charged with having a propagation program if they can, to help bolster the natural populations of shellfish and also to help feed the general public. It's an important food source to humans. Recreational shellfishing in Barnstable is renowned across the Commonwealth. We've seen a steady increase in the amount of permits sold and the amount of people showing up each tide to harvest from our waters. Since 2010, which was the last time that a local comprehensive plan was put in place, our quahog production has increased from around 800,000 quahogs per year to 3 to 4 million quahogs per year. Our oyster propagation has increased from around 650,000 oysters grown per year to a little over 1 million oysters grown per year. We're charged with doing shellfish habitat assessments, which look at every embayment within this town and designate areas of high shellfish value. Those assessments are to be used when looking at coastal projects that are proposed to weigh against, the importance of the habitat. They've been completed for 3 bays, East Bay and the Centerville River, Hyannis, and Barnstable Harbor since 2010. Most recently, 3 bays and Barnstable Harbor were completed over the past few years, but the 2023 assessments of those areas have not yet been adopted by the Conservation Commission. Our propagation with quahogs, starts off with very small seed. We buy them for, seed availability reasons and for price point reasons. Very small, typically around 1 millimeter. We grow them in floating upwellers where they're given lots of extra nutrients and oxygen through the upwelling system until they're about the size of an M&M. And then we plant them out in the field under predator exclusion nets that we maintain for a little over 2 years. And then we dig them all up and relay them all over town. One change that I've seen in my tenure is that when I started off as a seasonal employee in the propagation program, we were able to plant nets of baby quahogs basically anywhere we wanted to. And the unfortunate reality now is we have just a handful of nursery sites that are suitable for putting that small seed under nets, and now rely on those nursery areas because of habitat degradation to grow those quahogs to a size that are field plant ready, which is more labor intensive. Oysters, we grow in 2 different ways, either by remote set, where young oysters will settle on mother shells. You can see a picture of an oyster, the second picture, that has a bunch of tiny baby oysters attached to it, so we call spat. And then those mother shells are grown out in trays, broken up into individuals, and then cast to the bottom to harden up for eventual consumption. But we also buy from our local growers, sometimes seed and sometimes legal stock that's ready for planting, because we do believe in giving some of our money back to our local blue economy. Continued shellfish propagation challenges, current and continuing, water quality, habitat degradation, nutrient loading, more frequent adverse weather events, ocean acidification, sea level rise, nuisance species that are endemic to the region, invasive species that are popping up and proliferating, continued additions of moorings, docks, and piers, change what we're able to do, what numbers we can produce, and where we're able to grow shellfish. You can see on the left a picture of a map from August 25th, 2019, that show areas closed to shellfishing. And then you can see on the right a picture from July 1st, 2003, a little less than 4 years later, of around the same summer season, areas closed within 3 bays to shellfishing. There's been an increase of approximately 310 moorings added to the town of Barnstable waters since the year 2000. In the year 2019, the National Shellfish Sanitation Program made changes to its model ordinance, which in very layman's terms, because shellfish terms can just be daunting if you're not familiar with the fishery, is about an 800-page document that dictates how all shellfish harvesting and handling is conducted across the country. They made permanent rule changes to shellfish areas in proximity to mooring area closures, mooring areas. And now when I have a mooring area as defined that has more than 20 boats in it for the summer season, I have to close that area to shellfishing until there are less than 20 boats in that area, which typically is not until after the beginning of November. Approvals of docks, piers, and other coastal projects have continued at a steady pace over time, even in areas designated as high-value shellfish habitat. I don't have the exact numbers, but if you go to the Cape Cod Commission's website and check out all of the old historical maps of the area, you can count and you can see that there's a steady increase of those types of structures within our embayments. Marinas that leave boats in water year-round, whether they're being used or not, results in those shellfish areas being designated as prohibited, meaning that no shellfishing will ever be allowed in those areas again. Changes in water quality have caused some areas to change from open status to conditionally approved, subject to seasonal closures. There's a small portion in the Narrows, the Cotuit Narrows, that you can see that was open in August of 2019 and is now subject to a seasonal closure June 15th to October 1st, water quality pending. And it's almost like you can sort of see the water quality issues from that watershed leaching into Cotuit Bay. We also have aquaculture. The town has 72 individual aquaculture sites encompassing approximately 156 acres between Barnstable Harbor and 3 bays. Our blue economy are amongst the top 3 producers of oysters and quahogs in the state of Massachusetts every year. So congratulations to our growers for doing an excellent job. Up top is a picture of the aquaculture zone in Barnstable Harbor. Off to the bottom right is one site that we have permitted off of Bone Hill Road, also in Barnstable Harbor. And then in the left are all of our aquaculture sites that are privately leased in 3 bays. Since 2010, aquaculture operations are more managed by the Natural Resources Division through the employment of an aquaculture specialist. When aquaculture first took off, it was largely unregulated because it was sort of a pet pilot project to save failing commercial fisheries, and nobody was really expecting that it would gain the traction, popularity, and notoriety that it has now today. Responsibility for tagging of gear and for retrieval of gear that goes rogue has increased over those years that we've had a dedicated specialist, not only showing that management helps, but also shows that there's an investment of growers locally to say, yes, aquaculture is good for the environment, but we do understand that sometimes things go missing, but we understand our responsibility for those missing things. Regulations pertaining to aquaculture have and are still being formulated to evolve with the industry. In this town, most of our aquaculture regulations were developed in the 90s when I was in middle school, and are not indicative of what aquaculture is today in this town. It's a long and often challenging project, but we make headway with it every year. And pertaining to private aquaculture, back in 2016, we did promote a 208 plan bookend in the form of seasonal nurseries in North Bay amongst the 6 growers that exist within Cotuit and West Bay, but it was never formally adopted. So where do we go from here? In a perfect world, this is like a young me child's wish list. Protection of shellfish and other marine species habitat should be paramount. We're beyond the tipping point and cannot wait for the effects of townwide sewer to address this. Action is needed now. Shellfish are in our impaired embayments. Shellfish do nitrogen remediation and nutrient uptake. It's quantifiable in the amount of meats that are removed, but it's modest and it's localized and can only do so much, but it is a way to mitigate nutrient loading while we wait for the full effects of sewer to take place. Eelgrass monitoring of existing eelgrass beds in town should continue, and efforts to bolster protection of such beds should be implemented. I have here a picture of the eelgrass monitoring that we do. We check on our existing beds yearly. We've been doing it for close to a decade now, just to monitor the health of them throughout the year. And then below them, of course, scallops, because without eelgrass, you don't have any of those. I believe an evaluation of moorings and their effects on habitat townwide should be conducted to see if a moratorium is necessary. When those changes to the model ordinance took place, Division of Marine Fisheries told me that our town would be the first to be audited by FDA because we have more moorings in this town than any other municipality in the Commonwealth. So we would be the first to be audited when those changes took place. I think an evaluation of docks and piers townwide should be conducted to see if a moratorium on future developments is necessary. I think there's place for personal responsibility of property owners who can directly impact our salt and freshwater bodies with choices of septic, landscaping maintenance, and that should be explored, not only for people who live directly on the shoreline, but for people who are contributing to those watersheds. And I think there are opportunities that have to be revisited or explored for the first time in 3 bays in Popponesset Bay, because there's only so much that municipal propagation to do, and the benefits of continual removal of shellfish to market by private aquaculture is quantifiable in nitrogen credits. Thank you.
All right, and then moving on to Sandy Neck, which is also the Sandy Neck Park Manager. I didn't really get into how long I've been with this town, but I've been with the town for 20 years. Most of that time was as Sandy Neck Park Manager, and then more recently, I got the additional duties of the Director of Natural Resources. So we all love and know Sandy Neck. It's a regionally significant property that has extreme value and attributes and is really the jewel, in my opinion, of our town. It's has a lot of resiliency baked into the cake because it is not developed for the most part. And we have a number of accomplishments that have occurred since our 2010 project 2010 plan that I want to highlight. I've been personally involved with a 23-year invasive species removal program on Sandy Neck. And at this point, we've got a number of species under control. So we're kind of holding Sandy Neck in a old Cape Cod time, not just in terms of development, but also in terms of the plant ecology. So that's exciting. And we have a number of endangered species protection programs that have been very successful. Kind of want to highlight our diamondback terrapin program, which is well beloved in this town. When I started as a park manager, we started actively managing the terrapins and really getting into our Head Start program. And if you see these terrapins in our schools being raised by our community, we also started capping nests to improve survivorship. And you can see there from the graph, when we started about 20 years ago, we were running around 100 female turtles nesting per season, and now we're at 400. So that's an example of a system that is got a lot of resiliency, a lot of opportunity for management that has a lot of results. As I mentioned, we have an educational outreach program. A big part of that is our diamondback terrapin program, but we also do quite a bit of outreach throughout the town, both at Sandy Neck and through our natural resource department. We had secured a habitat conservation plan, which is actually in your draft. So a habitat conservation plan would take me quite a bit of time to explain, but the synopsis of it is that it's a state and federal permit that allows us, in the Sandy Neck case, to deter piping plovers within a small section of our beach to allow that off-road vehicle use to continue. And we've been able to have our beach open without any closures for the last 3 years because of this permit. Actually, I think it's been more than that. And in exchange, what that's doing is it's increasing our revenue, which is what we feed back into our Sandy Neck Enterprise account for all of these important programs, our outreach, and also to fund our capital improvement projects. So the biggest project ahead of us at Sandy Neck is to deal with the effects of climate change. We have a lot of infrastructure that's right on the edge of our shoreline. The picture on the left is when we became perilously close to losing our parking lot after one of our storms. So we really need to, and we're working towards pulling that infrastructure back away from the shoreline. Fortunately, we have a place to go with that. And then the second part of the project is to look to nature to help us create a more resilient primary dune in front of the parking lot, which is also something that I would recommend for our south side beaches. As staff has mentioned, we're seeing pretty extreme storms on the south side, pretty eye-opening in habitat loss, and a lot of our public beaches need to be looked at for ways to use nature to inform us how we can buffer those systems and make them more resilient. The other thing I want to talk about, and one of the main things I've done for this town, is manage our piping plover population. This is an asset. We have one of the top plover populations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You can see from that map, those are all locations of nesting areas, in many of those cases multiple nests. So we have them not just on Sandy Neck, but also on the south side. Piping plovers are heavily managed and heavily protected, and they're slowly creeping up in numbers. So you can see that graph is Sandy Neck. There's just a slow, gradual increase at Sandy Neck. This year we had a record number of piping plover nests. We had 57, which is really remarkable, and it goes back to our habitat conservation plan, where we're able to really protect and improve that population while still providing recreational opportunities, and that's really the balancing act there. So having done this for 20 years, we're seeing statewide, and my other colleagues that manage other beaches, we're seeing piping plover numbers slowly creeping up. We're seeing a decrease in nesting habitat due to storms, so all those erosion events are taking away plover habitat, so these plovers are ending up in some very odd places nesting. There's more human pressure from development and from recreational opportunities on our shoreline. And so we kind of see this slow train wreck of this, future conflict, which is actually already playing out, where we want to still maintain access for the public to the beach. We still want to maintain, what makes Cape Cod and why we're here is to be able to get to the water, but we still need to protect those birds. So I've started this project with permitting. Essentially, we need to really look at permitting. We need to make compromises, and we need to do some planning on how we're going to address this population and still be able to achieve what we want to achieve on our shorelines. So hopefully I can read this. So we had a lot to say, but I wanted to sum it up if I could just take one more minute to sort of sum up the bullet points of what staff and I were brainstorming about when we were given this chore. What would it be if it was up to you, what would you do in the next 10 years is kind of how I framed it, right? So this was our brainstorming. Is accomplish the Sandy Neck Beach Park Coastal Resiliency Project, which is well on its way. We're doing quite well. Use natural solutions to improve resiliency to our public beaches and waste to water. Evaluate proactive planning and permitting to protect endangered species habitat while still providing recreational opportunities to the public. Maximize the ecological health of the town's herring runs. Focus on protection and restoration of the town's open space wildlife corridors and sensitive habitats. Protect the town's remaining eelgrass beds. Explore opportunities to increase aquaculture on the south side. Consider moratoriums on new docks and moorings while a study is conducted that evaluates the effects of these structures on shellfish habitat. Natural Resource Division becoming more involved at the planning level of development and land acquisition. Evaluate mechanisms for shellfish habitat protection. And then consider regulations that place more responsibility on property owners regarding environmentally sound practices, ecological landscaping, reduced lawns, vegetated buffer zones and wildlife corridors, fertilizer bans, and irrigation restrictions. So we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Avery.
Where are those eelgrass beds?
I was going to ask, how many eelgrass beds do we really have?
So we have existing eelgrass beds that span from sort of the outside jetty of Calmus as you exit Hyannis Harbor, around the inside of Calmus and Nantucket Sound, and then along SD Avenue. And then we do still have some spotty sections of eelgrass outside the Katuitt Bay Cut that extends out toward Oregon Beach. We looked at historic areas as well to see where there may be, pieces of eelgrass still present. We haven't found any there yet.
I had a question regarding the study for moorings. Would that include looking at the moorings? I know it's been talked about before for helical versus chain. And what else might that include? Would you looking at why these areas can't be used for seeding and the discharges from the boats while they're mooring? Is that an issue?
Well, we do see an increase in discharges from boats, especially in the high season, that often are difficult to trace back to a vessel at the time that we're witnessing it. In well-established mooring areas, they essentially become sort of deposition muck puddles. If you were to dive the mooring area outside of Cordwood Landing as it overlooks to Katuitt Oyster Company, you hit sludge after 4 feet or so, and it becomes very difficult to even see and find the bottom. In the eelgrass beds that we monitor outside of SD Avenue, you can see where use of helical anchors may actually help protect the eelgrass, because there are scours around all the areas where like mushroom anchors are used. So I think all of those things would be things that I would encourage having looked at.
I just want to say this was a lot of really, really interesting information. Will we be receiving a copy of your presentation?
We'd be happy to share
That would
that.
be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Kate's shaking her head yes. Asia?
So great presentation. As someone who's not originally from the Cape, who's grown up in cities most of her life, I was a little confused at the beginning, but thank you for explaining what a mooring and things like that were to someone like me who's allergic to shellfish. I think that they should be protected. I think that would it be something that we should consider eliminating all docks like that we have in current existence? I feel like with a problem this severe, we should be eliminating fertilizer tomorrow on town council and putting out so that we have no more new docks to protect the water. Then we can build.
There is still in existence an overlay that put a moratorium of new docks and piers in Katuitt Bay only, but I think that is something because of the amount of docks and piers that have proliferated in recent decades would be worthy of looking at. There's not much you can do for the structures that are existing, with the exception of perhaps requesting they allow us to do propagation suspended from the bottoms of them seasonally.
Susan?
I have another question that I was just reminded of. I think that Falmouth has done something about fertilizers. Are you familiar with that? And whether it has had any effect?
I do live in Falmouth. I don't fertilize, so I'm not familiar with any bans because I would never do it to begin with.
Maybe it was a voluntary thing, yeah.
It might be, I'm not sure. I think a lot of the problems for towns that do have fertilizer bans is who enforces it,
The town of Barnstable has a fertilizer regulation,
So
whether it's enforced.
we're hearing from the audience that there is a regulation in the town of Barnstable on fertilizer.
Yeah, there's a regulation within a buffer zone of a watershed. Yep, that is correct. Enforcement is extremely challenging.
Fran?
I just wanted to say, Katuitt is certainly bore the brunt of moorings. We have moorings popping out of Katuitt Harbor, and it's just not a problem with the moorings, it's a problem with all the people who come into the village to either launch their boats or use their boats that are on moorings. And it's a two-edged sword. It's producing, pollution from cars and people, but it's also just, it's impossible to get around inside. The Katuitt Mosquito Yacht Club has problems, running their races in the harbor because of all the moorings out there that are in the way. It's really gotten out of hand. We aren't the only harbor in Katuitt, in Barnstable.
I have a question. In the winter, I have a view of the Great Marsh, and I've noticed after 45 years, more and more flooding. Do you track how often the marsh floods now, the Great Marsh?
Yeah, that's the Great Marsh, largest marsh on Cape Cod, second largest marsh in Massachusetts, and an extremely healthy system is flooding. We've had a little respite this year. Everything's been coming out of the south this year. But we've had some really extreme flooding events. The Sandy Neck Gatehouse has flooded twice. The water's been going right up into the dunes. Those were cyclone bombs, I think, both of those. But there's also other factors, obviously, sea level rise, climate change. One of those events was unfortunate because the marsh had flooded, froze, and then another big tide came in, and there was nowhere for that volume to be taken up. But a big concern, and we're seeing like with 6A flood, and the fire chief, West Barnstable fire chief, has said he's never seen it like that before. So, even in my 20 years, which is just a blink of time, I'm seeing a huge change to our storms and the effect on our environment.
I have another question. Sorry, Avery. Dumping on open space, does that fall into your enforcement regulations or duties?
Yes, it does. So we do enforcement regarding those activities, and we do surveillance in areas that we know are common dumping locations. It's difficult to catch the people that do it, but yeah, we're out there. That's one of our tasks for sure.
Follow-up question. Do you mind, Madam Clerk? No. So it seems to me, has there been, and we don't have to have a long answer now, but I'd like to find out, has there been some kind of a plan with the transfer station? I don't know, we used to call it the dump when I was a kid. Is there any thought about giving people free dump days that we could just direct them to get rid of their stuff there instead of throwing it on the side of the road? I mean, I used to manage a property that had chronic dumping going. I'd have my little old ladies out there cleaning up dead cats, so it's just, you see a lot of stuff, right? But it just seems to me like that's been going on for years and years and years, and there's got to be has anyone ever sat down and had a conversation with?
It is a perpetual thing that we deal with. Yeah, it's not just a seasonal issue. That would be a conversation that we could have with the transfer station, but it would really be up to them, and it would be, because they're taking all of that, right? Yeah, so.
Wendy?
Avery.
Phragmites.
Really? A Phragmites question?
I know you love them, Nina. I know you've eradicated them on Sandy Neck, but they're not eradicated around Barnstable Harbor. I don't think they can be.
I think, so Phragmites is common reed with a fluffy head, really, really, really tall. It's actually all connected underneath, so it's one plant, right? So you gotta get all of it, or it's useless because it's going to translocate energy and pop back up. Sandy Neck, back in the day, I was able to catch it at the beginning of an invasion. So it was a piece here, and it was as a result of the flooding from Hurricane Bob and the perfect storm for those of us that remember those storms. So I was able to catch it within 10 years of that and kind of be at the leading edge of the fire, if you will. But driving down 6A, there's a lot of Phragmites, and I think we're past the point. I really do, because it would just, the only way to eradicate it in that setting is a whole lot of herbicide, and I don't think that's appropriate. It is pulling nitrogen out. You uncut, you got me going, but it is pulling nitrogen out of the system. There's some communities that harvest it and then pull that out, similar to shellfish, where they're actually drawing nitrogen out of the system. But I think it's really too far gone. We need to catch areas that are freshly invaded and focus on those.
Fascinating. Cheryl, did you have a question?
No, I had a comment to your free dump day suggestion. I like the idea, but I also see it as problematic. I know that, transfer station. Because the prices have gone up so much over the last few years for that, you have a lot of people who are backing out. If you had a free dump day, what I would foresee for that is that some people will say, well, I'll just, have it for a whole month and then come and bring it in, which is going to overload the, yeah, you see what I mean? I like the idea, but unless it's like one day every 3 months or something.
Maybe
Need a
an
committee.
income-based one?
Say
Maybe
what?
based off of income, because if you can't afford it, based off of your income, make it so that everyone has access, and maybe they won't dump. I live on Independence, and right where I'm at on Independence is near the nature preserve, and I walk up behind where I live at, and I see all of these sofas, mattresses, all of that right on my walking trail, which we're not even allowed to use because there's so much crap there.
Perhaps another thing that might want to be looked at and reassessed. I just imagine, I do have a sticker for it. I know it costs a fortune. And the lines are already pretty long, but if you had one day and it was monthly, I think the lines would be a lot longer.
Maybe I'll work on that in retirement. Okay. Is there anything else that we want to talk about? So you have a wish list of your properties, your upland properties. You have that wish list of, in a perfect world, money was no object. These are the properties we would protect, upland.
We certainly can work on that. We've never been asked that, but we'd be happy to pull that together. Yep. And I think the APCC's work on this topic is really timely, and we certainly would start there.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Hold on.
Super short one. Just to say, fantastic and very informative presentation. I'll look forward to receiving that information. Nina, you had mentioned about a moratorium being needed, and one of the reasons for that is because this would be one of the earlier areas to be audited. I think that goes in line with also what was brought up with the wind project, and that where it was suggested and requested a review on the impact. So maybe put the two of them together, an impact review on that particular item, and also that would include the moratorium on the other areas as well. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. Kathy. Thank you, Nina. Just have a quick public comment here. Your mic.
Okay, I'm sorry the mic was not on. So Kathy
That's okay.
Ledeck, 3 quick points. Fabulous presentation. There are 3 points that I'd like to make about this. First of all, on fertilizers, Town of Orleans is moving ahead on something. Should look at that. With respect to the 4 bullet points at the bottom, it says fertilizer bans. I would suggest that you consider adding pesticide bans. And in parentheses, you could pursue, if you wish to do this, I'm not sure I support it, but integrated pest management. And then as a leader on Cape Cod, the town of Barnstable should implement these 4 bullet points effective immediately. They should serve as a leader to show everyone else that they're doing it, and we as private property owners should copy them. They should monitor and collect data and report on their success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we are about 15 minutes beyond our target end time, so last chance for the committee. Fran? Come on up, Kate.
You can do pest management just by some pests, but just feeding the birds year-round, which I do. I don't have any bugs in my house. And I wanted to say about the shellfishing, when I grew up in Cotuit, there were probably only 900 people in the village at that time, back in the dark ages. And there were many people, the parents of the children I went to school with, who the only reason they had food on the table was because their fathers were shellfishing.
That's right.
And so, and I'm sure that's going on today. And so it's very important that we protect all of that.
Thank you.
Can I make one?
All right, Avery.
I want to thank you for bringing up again the irrigation restrictions. This is something that I think we have to really address throughout this plan. There's so many ways. I feel like we don't hear enough about it, and I think it's one of the most egregious uses of our drinking water that I know of.
Okay. Cheryl.
Another quickie. With regard to the pesticide issue, also, I would think that would have to be clearly identified. So with 2 particular areas, we have a lot of people have dogs. This is a high tick area, and which is quite dangerous for dogs. So something where pesticide for ticks things, but also we also have a swarm issue, and unfortunately, I am a victim of that, having been attacked by a swarm, as was my 2 doors over neighbor.
Of bees?
Swarm of bees, 64 stings, where they stopped counting and said, can we just say multiple? And it was the same with the gardener from my owner 2 doors over. And I was told that this is when I left the hospital, we have a huge swarm problem. But I now wipe out the nest if I see them, because I get the 25-foot spray and then run inside. But I wouldn't have to go closer than that or be outside. I would just suggest it be looked at a little more closely. Thanks.
I think everything that gets suggested gets a hard look. Anybody else? Okay.